What is up, and welcome to Making the Grade, where we take a look at the PFF grades from the Arizona Cardinals' most recent game and try to figure out what the data are telling us. And this week, they're not telling us a pretty picture. There's a few interesting things to look at. There's a few, bright spots, but it was a rough game when you lose 34-13. In a game that just where the Cardinals couldn't get anything going, the grades aren't going to look great, across the board. So we'll get into that in a minute. But first, let me say hey to some of the folks that are in the chat. We got Class Nasty. What is up? Appreciate you being here. We got Silver Wolf AZ. Assuming we are in a New England style rebuild, is it possible that they are setting up K1 Phil? I don't think so. I really believe they are trying to build around Kyler. And, if you look at how hard it is to find a good quarterback in the NFL, I know Kyler can be a polarizing figure to some people, but they talked about this, they talk about this regularly on broadcast. And you hear all the time is how difficult of a matchup he is for defenses. Like, we take it for granted. We see it week in and week out, but what he brings in the running game, and he has good arm talent, that's hard to find. So I believe that they are all in on trying to build around that. I think they've been clear about that. And I take them at their word on that. And I think they have good reason to. I know, again, there's some people who don't believe in Kyler, and, I don't want to get into all that with those folks. We go round and round all the time on Twitter and such, but I think they see what he can do. I think that they see what he can do with his arms and his legs, and they want to capitalize on that, and they want to build with him. So I don't think they're setting him up to fail at all. Brett Jones, thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to this. I think Kyler graded good again. So is the rest of the offense not good enough to win games? Yeah, that's a great question. Now, Kyler, and we'll get into this, his overall grade wasn't great, but it was brought down a bit by his run grade. His passing grade was decent, but we'll look at that. But, we'll talk about that. The talent's there, but they're not playing well enough. But, that's, yeah. And, it's funny. We going into the season, we thought the offense would be fine. It was the defense we were worried about. The defense hasn't been great. They've had their moments, but the offense struggling is really the thing that, is kind of unexpected and concerning. Silver Wolf reminding everyone to hit the like button. Thank you for that. Please do. That helps for this to get pushed out by the algorithm so people can, can kind of find Cardinals fans and they can find it. Zach Felix, sorry about this week's performance, Professor. I know it was disappointing to you. Yeah, it's disappointing to all of us, right? So, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Going into Green Bay, Green Bay is a good team. It's on the road. Obviously, I always hope for a win. This wasn't a game I went into expecting to win. But I was certainly hoping for a better performance than what we saw. Which is unfortunate. So let's get into it. We look at real quick, the box score 34-13. The Cardinals had, they didn't do well in the first quarter, 0 points in the first quarter. The second quarter, they got 10, then 3 in the third, and then they were shut out from there on out. Kyler's stat line isn't bad, 214 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. 97.7 quarterback rating, 56.0 QBR. The running game, though, they could not get anything going with consistency, right? They had 89 yards rushing total, and this is a team that's supposed to run well, right? And Kyler adds a dimension to that. So you expect to see 150 plus yards from this team every week when you add what Kyler brings on top of, James Conner and such. But, James Conner had an average of 3.4 yards per carry. Obviously he got banged up and, at a point, and Benson, he had a nice 20-yard run that brought that average up. But aside from that, on 4 other runs, he had 6 yards total, right? So, he had 5 carries for 26 yards, but 20 of it was on 1 run. We've talked about it before. He just the thing that coming out of college, they talked about with him, his ball carrier vision, and his patience and, working with blocks is certainly a concern. DeMarcado, he led in terms of yards per carry. He didn't look bad. Receiving, McBride had a nice game, 8 receptions for 96 yards on 8 targets. DeMarcado had a few catches. Dortch had a few. Obviously the story is Marvin Harrison Jr. going out with the concussion. So hopefully to get him back. And I know there's been a lot of talk on Twitter about him. People saying he's a bust already. And that's, to me, that's ridiculous. He's going to be fine. I think you have to step back and understand and look at through the lens of league history. Not every, some receivers come out gangbusters, but he's shown some good things, and he's going to be fine. I think it's been a rough go, but it's been a rough go for the entire offense, with the exception of really one game. They have had a hard time putting up big numbers, but there were some fumbles in this game. No sacks for the Cardinals on the defense side of the ball, right? They didn't give up any sacks offensively, but that certainly pressure's been a concern. Murphy Bunting with the interception. We'll talk about him later. Anyway, but let's get into the offensive grades. I always like to start with the offensive line. So let's start right there. It was up and down. Paris Johnson Jr. We'll talk about him in a minute, but he has solid game, 74.3. Froholt was good in the pass blocking, but struggled in the run blocking, so that brought his overall grade down. Beacham, good in pass blocking, not so great in run blocking, brought his grade down. Tristan Colon, starting at right guard, for the injured Will Hernandez, played well, 72.2. He was better in the run blocking than he was pass blocking, but he was overall pretty good. Evan Brown didn't have a great game. He better at pass blocking than run blocking this game. And then we had an Isaiah Adams sighting late. I believe it was late in the game. 23 snaps, our third round pick. He played well, reasonably well. 64.1 was better in the run blocking game. That's an encouraging sign. This team, is building through the draft. That's the plan, long run or long term. And it would be really nice if we got to see him, kind of take one of those starting jobs. One of those starting guard jobs, especially with Will Hernandez out, right? It'd be nice to see him develop into a starter, which is obviously what you would hope when you draft a guard in the third round. You expect that they will develop into a starter. Interior offensive linemen usually take him a little bit later. That was encouraging to see him get some action and play reasonably well. But I want to talk about Paris Johnson Jr. And I tweeted about this a couple days ago. If you look at it, he has been really consistent this year in terms of not having a single bad game, right? All these grades are in that green that you like to see, right? Lowest grade was 66.1. And, for reference, kind of a baseline of average play, like if you didn't do anything spectacular or bad, if you literally just did a very average, nothing special, nothing bad, every single play, nothing of any significance, good or bad, it's a 60, right? Is the grade you get for that. So to have all of his grades are above average, right? And some grades really good, A 3.9. And he's been overall pretty good in passing and run blocking. He had one game where his run blocking was below 60, but every other game, except for the game against Detroit, both his run and pass blocking were in the 60s, right? Or better. So this is really good consistency. He's not having up and down games. He's having some games that are better, right? He was really good against Washington, really good against Buffalo, but he has not been bad in a single game. And I talked about this before on when I did my PFF rant. No one outside of PFF really knows exactly what goes in their secret sauce for their grades. There's sort of a formula that weighs things differently. But one of the things I talked about is that I suspect consistency weighs for those grades, because if you look at it, his overall grade at 83.5, right? That's his overall season grade. That's not an average of this, right? In fact, he has two games that were higher than that, but if you were averaging these out in some way, you'd expect it to be a good bit lower. So, and I've also talked about how I think that when you have more consistency between the pass and run blocking, more balance, I think it boosts your grade. So that's why you have players who will have a really good grade in one, but low in the other. And overall, their overall grade isn't great, right? So my suspicion, and I don't have any insider information on this, but just my suspicion is that something about consistency, good games, every game, and balance, good rating in both areas like this, I think that affects the overall grade positively. I think they weight it for that. And then you look at his overall grade, 83.5, right? Really good for in his second year, first year back at left tackle. So the Cardinals seem to have really found their guy in Paris Johnson Jr., that left tackle bookend. And so listen, we're right now, as frustrating as this game is, we're looking for, we need to look for some silver linings and things, so to speak. But this is a really encouraging sign that Paris Johnson Jr. has just been that dude, right? That they drafted him to be. So you love seeing that. A couple of quick comments. Mazaki Felix saying teams are playing run early and then they get a lead and they just dropping the coverage and smothering the offense. Yeah, that seems to be part of what's going on. And yeah, a lot of talk about, what's going on with the offensive system and especially the passing game, but even the running game was tough this time. And now the weather contributed to that, like a lot of slipping, but both teams had to deal with that, right? Brett Jones saying, I'd like to see a play chart. Are they running behind Johnson? Because it doesn't seem like it. That's a good question. There's probably something to that. If I had more time, I wonder, see offense. I don't know. I haven't looked at these closely. That's game, run blocking. That's just the grades. So I'm not really sure. That's a really good question, but by design, you don't run a lot off your left tackle. I mean, there you some, but you run more to the right side, or you're doing inside kind of stuff where off between your guards and such. So you do run some that way, no doubt, but not as much as you do behind others. But that's a good question. So Paris Johnson Jr., love what we're seeing from him. That's certainly a bright spot on this team. A team that right now we could use some bright spots. So overall, the offensive line graded it wasn't horrible. I mean, you didn't see dark orange or red. So no one totally stank up the place terribly. Froholt's run blocking wasn't great, and the run blocking in general wasn't probably as good as the pass blocking. But the offensive line has been more consistent than it had in past years. That's maybe a low bar, but nonetheless. So now getting over to going to tight ends is usually where we go next. Tip Raymond didn't, pass blocking on 3 snaps graded well, run blocking 7 not as good. Again, not surprising. The run blocking grades low, considering that they didn't run the ball well, right? And again, how much this was the weather, I don't know. But it was a rough game. So he didn't have a great game. He's a rookie though, so the fact that he's on the field is a plus. Rookie tight ends take a couple years to develop. And so the fact that they're using him is a plus. The fact that he's getting 12 snaps and they're using him for blocking and he's got a role on this team is certainly a plus. Elijah Higgins did not have a good game, 43.3, right? McBride had a good game, and he had great game stat wise in terms of yards. But he also overall graded well, right? So it was a nice game from McBride, one of the few bright spots there, right? Now let's look at looking at the receivers. Greg Dortch, didn't grade particularly well. He played 36 snaps, but had a few receptions, but didn't grade particularly well. Same with undrafted free agent Xavier Weaver. Going to Marvin Harrison Jr. on 8 snaps, didn't grade well, and then obviously he left with the injury. Michael Wilson, he didn't grade well either. None of the receivers, McBride graded well, but he was really the only pass catcher that graded well, right? So listen, and Austin's bringing up a point here, kind of troubling Kyler those great pass line grades, but still struggles from the pocket. But at the same time, the receivers didn't grade well, so might not have been getting a lot of help from his receivers. And we'll talk about, Kyler, his grade overall was low, but that's actually brought down a lot by his run blocking grade and running grade, not run blocking, running grade. His passing grade of 65.6 is reasonable. It's above average. It's not, we want better from him, but he wasn't terrible. We'll get into his grades a little bit more. So I think it's, I don't know. I mean, certainly the slipping receivers, and that I know both teams had to deal with that, no doubt. So that you don't lean into that too much. The whole offense struggled, and no one is feasting in this offense right now, really at all. And to me, I think it's more of an overall system situation. I think Petzing, especially on the passing side of things, I know they struggled with the run game this week, but they've been good at running the ball overall this year. But I think something about this offense, and I know like Kurt Warner tweeted something about this. I know some people retweeted that and talked about that, where he looked at the offense and talked about how the route concepts aren't setting up them for success. And so so I think there's something to that. But as Calvin, good to see you, Calvin. Appreciate you being here. A frustrating loss, no doubt. Like how bad they looked, right, overall, or how much they just couldn't get things going. So Zach Pascal, another receiver, didn't grade well, right? On only 8 snaps. So the pass, aside from Trey McBride, none of the pass catchers graded well, right? That's certainly discouraging and frustrating. Then we look at the running backs. Trey Benson didn't grade well, right? 50.4. DeMarcado graded well, right, on 31 snaps. He's been a good player for them. He's like Emari DeMarcado, undrafted free agent out of TCU. People talk about his blocking, his pass blocking, which, he's got some good grades on that, but like he's had some nice games, grade overall. So, last year his overall grade was 73.4 as an undrafted rookie free agent on 294 snaps. 74.6 grade. He's a solid player, in that running back room. You don't want him to be your bell cow, but he's a nice guy. They found a nice player there, to be part of that stable of running backs. James Conner had a rough game. 59.8 overall grade. The passing grade of 32.9 really brought him down. His running game of 68.6 wasn't too bad, right? But, not the running back struggled. And then, we get to, that brings us to Kyler Murray, right? Overall 59.2, 65.6 passing, 49.4 running. He didn't run very much. He didn't get a lot of yards on the ground, right? Running. Manana saying, we suck, bro. I'm tired of losing this. And I feel that. Look at me. I'm old. Right. I got this old beard. I'm old enough that I remember when the Cardinals came to Arizona. So listen, I've been dealing with this for a long time, the losing. So I feel that. I still believe in their process. I believe they're building it the right way. It's a little slow getting off the ground right now, but this is not me being blindly optimistic. There are ways, based on like analytics and based on people who I think know what they're talking about, there are ways you build a roster. It involves you draft heavily, build for the draft first. You emphasize premium positions, like the important positions like tackle and receiver and cornerback and edge rusher and quarterback in the early rounds, and the non-premium positions you address later. Free agency you use to get depth and some veterans who can fill in and start, but you don't overpay for free agency, because what you want to draft and develop the stars and pay them good money, the guys like McBride that we're going to pay. But you don't want to go after free agents for big money, because what you end up doing is you get a player who's 70% as good as McBride, but you're paying him like 80 or 90% of what you have to pay McBride if he's that good. It's just, there's so many reasons, right? Why I believe in their process, and it is not me being blindly naive. There are specific things they are doing that I think is the right way to build long-term. But right now it's frustrating. They're doing it differently than Keim did, though. Keim was signing old, broken down vets that had the name recognition, and then they get injured. And I know, listen, some of the guys that Monty signed got injured, but those guys were by design stopgaps. So I believe in the process, but I feel it's frustrating. Calvin knows Sunnyvale Stadium. It's been a journey, right? Do I think the Cardinals will trade off Buddha? I hope not. That's a really great question, because there's been increasing talk about this. I know Kyle Odegaard has talked about this. I know some other folks that I kind of follow and interact with on Twitter have. I think there's a chance they could. And I love Buddha. I think he's one of my favorite Cardinals that we've ever had. You love what he brings. I'm warming up to the idea a little bit. I know that he's getting older. You're going to have to pay him a lot of money to keep him. Safety is not a position where you want to put a lot of money necessarily. And you're building for the long run. I'm more open to it than I used to be. But I love Buddha, so I feel that, right? Couple other comments from Zach Felix. I remember watching Jim Hart and Neil Lomax, but yeah, I didn't watch Jim Hart, but I remember Neil Lomax, man. Brett saying, I think you kind of have to trade boot. I think people are warming up to this idea a little bit, and I hate it, but I get it, right? From a roster building perspective. Austin saying, do you think coaches just have a hard time using a player with the skill set of Kyler? He has elite skill set, but seems like those skill sets are hard to tap into. See, that's a really good question. I think it's less about Kyler, though, and more about I'm increasingly thinking Petzing's a new offensive coordinator, right? First time offensive coordinator. And I think he's smart. And I think he still could get there, but I think there's some things he's doing that he needs to work through and figure out. When you look at how, none of the receivers are consistently feasting. Like even McBride, who's been good, he's on track for, maybe 790 something yards. Last year he had over 800 yards. He's on track right now on pace for fewer yards than he had last year. And if you remember, he wasn't the starter right out of the gate last year, right? It took some time. So no one is feasting receiver wise in this, and no one's consistently good. So I just feel like it's more the something about what they're doing with the route concepts. And I'm not an X's and O's guy. I'm more of an analytics guy. So I totally defer to people who know that better. But it just feels like there's something they're doing in terms of the scheme that's not setting up anyone for success, at least in the passing game. The running game, this wasn't a good game, but the running game's been good. So I don't know that they don't know how to use Kyler as much as they don't know how to get his receivers open as consistently. And there've been other things, other analytics, and graphs that have gone around on Twitter that have kind of talked about separation and the receivers not getting as much separation. So I think they know what to do with Kyler. And I think that in a lot of ways they're doing it. They're doing a lot more play action, moving him and around the pocket, bootlegs here and there, and getting some options going, read options going. But those receivers just aren't getting that, right? Drew does not have the right receiver position. He wants tight end, a lot of learning backs to be the main receiver. I'm guessing a few typos there, but yeah. So I mean, they're definitely a heavier personnel, right? Tight end more, running more. That's what they did in Cleveland, right? So yeah. But I want to look at Kyler, some of the more advanced stats. Okay, so here's Kyler's grades this year, right? And he's had obviously. We remember that game against the Rams was just one of the best games ever, right? He's had two other good games, Buffalo, and last week 49ers was pretty good. This game, again, the overall grade 59.2 was similar to his grade in the Washington game. But the thing, again, I've noted here is if you look at it, that's brought down by his run grade of 49.2. His passing grade of 65.6 was, actually better than those other two games, right? Yeah, so value wide receivers and running. He doesn't value wide receivers or running backs, I guess. Okay. So his passing grade 65.6 is decent. You want better from him, but it wasn't a horrible game from Kyle. He had 214 yards, one touchdown, no interception. And I always like to look at these big time throws and turnover where he plays. And to me, this game was just for Kyler, at least in the passing game, it was there weren't a lot of big mistakes or really, maybe a few off throws here and there, but it's a very kind of milquetoast sort of game, right? Just kind of right? I mean, and you look at that's 0 big time throws and 0 turnover worthy plays. Now, and I tweeted out about this, his fumble grade was 79.3. And remember that there was that miscue on the handoff. So what that tells me is that the graders, when they looked at that, determined that Trey Benson was kind of at fault for that one. Remember that play, and there was some question in the broadcast about who was kind of at fault. So, but 0 turnover where they play, 0 big time throws. So it was very kind of nothing great or horrible in that regard. His time to throw was 2.81 seconds. No pressures converted to sacks. It was just kind of it wasn't horrible, but whatever. Question here: do you think Kyler's height actually affects his passing progressions? I mean, it might affect it a little bit. He seems to though, and I was looking. Here's what I would tell you. I was looking, and this doesn't exactly answer this, but I was looking at this before. His passing depth, like his short and medium, like that. The medium is some of the places people talk about. Maybe does that affect that? And but he's graded pretty well in everywhere except behind the line of scrimmage. To be honest, it may affect it some. I mean, and I think some people make a bigger deal out of that than I do. Like I think every quarterback has limitations, right? Kyler's his height, he might not be able to see as well over the line in some areas, but I don't know. I don't think it affects him as much as people think it does. And especially when they move him around, then it becomes less of an issue. But yeah. So anyway, his game, Kyler's passing, his game against Green Bay wasn't his best, but it wasn't horrible. Again, I wonder, he struggled a little bit. Some of that was the weather. Listen, we want better from him, but I don't think anyone who's saying who's trying to pin this one on Kyler, I think the whole offense really struggled. And thanks for being here. I think it's so wild that we're the least penalized team coming in this game. That was interesting, right? And now obviously they had a ton of penalties this game, so you don't like that. But going to this game that being least that I think that speaks to the culture and the discipline, right? That JG's implemented, right? So you like that. Now this was rough, and what's tough is, man, so many of those were offsides, especially early on, right? It's not even, there were a few penalties that you could maybe argue were a little ticky-tack right here and there, but those ones are pretty clear. It's hard to argue that one. Brett Jones saying they should try to take deep shots more. Didn't really see anything there last week. Yeah, I would like to see them do that more. Take a few shots, right? Take a few more shots deep. I get that they're trying to run the ball and work the tight ends and a lot of 12, 13 personnel kinds of contests, but let's take a few shots. Kyler's got the arm. You got the receiver, in Harrison when we get him back healthy, right? So that's the offensive side, right? It was, when you put up 13 points, you're not going to have great grades, and no real blue, just a few greens, right? McBride, Parrish Johnson Jr., really led the charge in terms of good grades, right? But it was right? Now let's look at the defensive side. There were a few standout performances. Tonga had a nice game, 83.1, right? Okwara graded well. Starling Thomas, so we'll get into that. Let's go ahead and go by, let's go actually sort it by coverage. That'll get us to start. We'll start with some of the defensive backs. Jalen Thompson, I tweeted about this, had a decent game, 68.6, and he struggled, at least based on his grades this year, right? Look at that 52-44. He had an okay game against Detroit. He's put together a couple games, San Francisco and Green Bay, where his grades have been better. So, I love Jalen Thompson as a player. He struggled early this year, but it seems like he's put a couple games together with decent grades. So I'm hoping that that's a sign that he's kind of going the right direction. So that was nice to see. Buda Baker didn't have a good game, 51.8 grade. He didn't grade well in anything, and tackling 34.6. That was, that's, you hate to see that because his calling card is what a ferocious player and tackler is. And it was just not a good game for him, right? If you look at this year, he's been decent this year. He's got a couple really good games. This was his worst game though. Against Buffalo, he didn't grade well again tackling, right? Or really against LA, but in the other three he had, but rough game for him. Garrett Williams had a nice game, right? 66.9. His tackling grade was low, but his coverage was good. They weighed that a lot more, I think, for cornerbacks. And he's had a nice season overall. He's had one bad game against Detroit. Really, every other game he's been good. In fact, if you look at that, and even against Detroit, his coverage grade, it wasn't great, but it was, his run defense was a big part of that. But you look at, he's grading 68.9, right? That's a really solid grade right there. 74.3 coverage grade. The former third round pick, we loved him last year. We loved him coming out of the draft, and really nice to see him playing well. But this is the guy we're going to talk about for a minute. Sean Murphy Bunting. In fact, like the thumbnail for this, for this live stream, I had a picture of him. Normally I go with someone who played well, but I went with Murphy Bunting because he is a player. There have been a lot of conversation about him on Twitter and 45.2 pass, overall grade, 43.7 coverage grade. He has not been good this year, right? You look at it, he had one, Buffalo is Detroit was a decent game for him, but every other game it's really struggled, right? And his coverage grades have been bad, better against run defense, and in his career, this, 50.9, this is his lowest grade of his career. He's been he had one good year with Tampa Bay. The rest, his rookie year wasn't too bad, I guess. He's a former second round pick. He struggled. And I'll say this, I have given him the benefit of the doubt up to this point because he's been forced to play cornerback one, and he is not a guy you want to be your cornerback one, but I understand the process of why they brought him in. They wanted to bring in a veteran who they weren't going to have to pay crazy money, right? I know they paid more for him than you might like, but the contract is reasonable. But they brought in a veteran who they felt like could kind of stabilize the room until some of the young players take his job, right? He was a placeholder by design. And that's kind of the free agency philosophy with a lot of their guys is find guys that you're comfortable they can start, but you want your young guys to take their job. That's really, that is with the exception of maybe Froholt, right? And that, maybe that was even their intention, but he certainly has solidified and taken that job and grabbed hold of the center position. But with a lot of these free agents that they, especially on the defensive side, that's kind of their philosophy, I think. Sign placeholders who can, that are better than an undrafted free agent, you hope, starting, but hope that the guys you draft develop and take their job. So he's not supposed to be a cornerback one. They've put him at cornerback one, but he's not supposed to be that. He's supposed to be your third cornerback, at best second quarterback, but you really don't, you want better than that, especially with what we've seen. So I've given him the benefit of the doubt at this point because he's had to play cornerback one, which means he's getting, covering the top receiver in the other team. And he's, he's over his head a little bit. Right. And clearly the grades have shown that. But here's the thing. If you look at the way Green Bay's roster is built, they have like 3 or 4 good developing young receivers, Dontavian Wicks. Let's see, let's look at their offensive, going by their receivers real quick. They've got Bo Melton, he's more of a backup. Jaden Reed, right? Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, right? Christian Watson. There's like 4 or 5 young guys there, but there's not a bona fide number one, right? They're all some nice players, and 1 or 2 of them might develop into that. You de facto, you might say Jaden Reed's their number one, but none of them are like a bona fide wide receiver one, like that, but they're deep and they're developing and they're young, right? So the point I'm making here is like that whole cornerback one degree of difficulty because you're covering the other team's best receiver. That just, to me, that argument doesn't stand up in this game because they don't have that elite wide receiver one. They have a lot of good guys. So like, I don't think he had a tougher assignment, significantly tougher. Maybe I'm wrong because I'm not an X's and O's guy, but based on the roster, the matchups, it doesn't seem like he had a significantly harder assignment than the other cornerbacks, but he still struggled. Right. And so I've tweeted about this. Like I'm at the point where I'm like, no, let's if not bench him, at least demote him. And let's see what, Max Melton can do. Max Melton didn't have a great game, but let's throw him in the water and see if he can swim. Let's see. Get him some, and he had a lot of snaps, which is nice, but they're not winning. Murphy Bunting is struggling. I'm now at the point where I'm saying, let's just throw some of the young guys in there and let them get the reps, even if they take their lumps. If they get beat up a little bit against these top receivers, so be it. Right. Let's let them get in there and kind of develop. That's where I'm at now. So Murphy Bunting, and it's tough because I liked the free agent process of signing. Like there's this whole kind of process over results where you're like, okay, if you have the right process and focus on the right process, you'll get the results, right? But sometimes the results don't work the way you think, but the process was right, if that makes sense. I think the free agent process was right. Find veteran guys who are serviceable starters, who can be placeholders, who will be healthy, and then you let your young guys develop and take the jobs. Unfortunately, the defensive linemen, Nichols and Johnson, or Jones, both are on the IR now, going on the IR. Murphy Bunting hasn't been good. So the outcome of their free agents, especially those big three, haven't worked out. Mac Wilson's been great for us. But I still liked the process. But man, I expected Bunting to be a little better than this, Murphy Bunting, but it is what it is. So yeah, Murphy Bunting. I'm ready to see. Let's see what Max Melton can do. That's where I'm at with that. Sterling Thomas had a nice game, right? Going on through the defensive backs, like 47 snaps, 75.7 grade, 81 on pass or on coverage grade. Let's see, and we're looking like if you look at him, like he's been up and down, right? He had a really good game against LA. Rough game against Washington, his average-ish grades. Good grade here. And, if you look at it, he has a 61.8 overall. Last year, they played a lot, but had a 46.1, so that was rough. But, like, it's interesting, like, he doesn't, his grades don't blow you away. He's had a couple nice games. 61.8 is okay. He's an undrafted free agent, so, the fact that he's starting is quite an accomplishment, right? But like when you look at him in the games, it just doesn't seem like he makes any big plays, but it doesn't seem like he makes a lot of mistakes either, right? He just seems like, and I see why the coaching staff like him, right? He seems to get the job done, right? Doesn't make the big plays, but he doesn't give up the big plays as much. So, so it's grown on me what the kind of player he's become for them. A couple quick comments. Brett Jones saying Garrett Williams tackling game continues to be bad. I don't like that. And the nickel move him outside and bench Bunting. Listen, I'd love to see Garrett Williams see what he can do on the outside, right? 100%. Nichols and Jones have been terrible bust signings. It's tough because again, like I liked the process, and I still think the process was right. Those were guys who have played snaps for other teams. They haven't been studs, but they've been serviceable, decent NFL players, and they're guys who haven't missed many games for injuries. So the fact that they're both in the IR is just like weird bad luck. It's not like they have injury histories, right? I liked the process, but the result just hasn't been good. And again, to me, those guys were veteran placeholders, just up the floor a little bit, but try to develop your guys, who will become those guys, right? Robinson, for example. But it hasn't worked out. So it's one of those where, again, I think the process is right, but the results didn't work out, right? Mazaki Felix, I don't think they were cervical. I think you mean something. This defense, I believe, statistically as bad as last year, but I haven't checked that yet. Brett Jones saying, done with Kazir White. Yeah, injuries. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, he hasn't played well, right? Bad luck. Got lucky on the pick last week, has been really bad the last 2 weeks, and his grades haven't been good. Yeah. Ant saying, even though Bunting has been disappointing, it's really hard for our secondary to cover for so long because we can't get pressure. We can't get pressure on rushing. And that's a fair point too. Like if you had better pass rush, it might not be, well, it would be a little better, right? If not a lot better. So that's certainly the degree of difficulty having to hold your coverage for that long. So that's a fair point, right? So that's certainly not doing them any favors. Max Melton again, 48. So his grade wasn't great, right? But he did have more. This was the most snaps he's had, right? You see like his snaps by week, 11, 25, 13, then 21, 32, 48. So they've gone up these, here in these last 3 weeks in a row. Had a really good game against Washington, decent against San Francisco. He struggled this game, but overall 60.7 as a rookie. So like he's, you want to see more consistency and get the grades up, but he's moving in the right direction in terms of snaps. So I'm hopeful that they're going to continue to ramp him up. So even though it wasn't a great game, um, good, in terms of the grade, you like seeing the more snaps, a significant amount, 48, right? Um, Keitrell Clark, for whatever reason, they're just playing him like a snap here and there. That was probably the kneel down or something. I don't know. I didn't check, but like he hasn't been playing a lot. So, would like to have seen more from him, but yeah. So going at the cornerbacks there, let's see. Got a couple comments. MGO, I do think that we, this team, can turn around, but man, this defense is absolutely disappointing. Hey, seriously, don't see a way defense can turn it around. Yeah. Here's the tricky, like the defense. I do think the defense can get better this year, but I don't think it's going to become a really good defense this year. They need to add some more pieces and need some players to develop. But I do want to kind of make a couple points about the roster and the personnel. This team has a lot of young players, okay? And a lot of key players and key positions that are young that they're hoping to develop, right? Guys like again, Max Melton, right? Garrett Williams is playing nice for them, but you've got Max Melton, you've got got Papo. He's a kind of guy that drafted last year. You've got the rookie Robinson, who Darius Robinson, who you hope will come back and play and develop, and you've got a few guys in offense too, and like it's one of those things where, like, even though you're not adding player, there's not like someone walking in that door who's turning things around significantly. If Max Melton develops over the course of the season, and by halfway through the season, he's like, got those snaps under his belt and he's become a solid cornerback, like that improves the defense, right? So I guess what I'm saying is when you've got so many young players you're trying to develop, there's the potential for that defense to get better over the course of the year, right? Because those players are becoming better players. So there's a little bit of a glimmer of hope there. Certainly Robinson coming back, if he can help with that pass rush, that can make a difference. But listen, this team needs an infusion of talent. And I really think their strategy was get the offensive players year one, right? Maybe, certainly added the receiver this year. And then they're going to the defense was going to be the thing they were going to try to coach up and then add pieces in years 2 and 3. It feels like that. But yeah, they need some pass rush help. They need some players, but I do think there's at least a little nuance that this team defense can get better as those young players get better. But who would you like to get a trade for? That's a good question. A lot of talk about pass rushers. Obviously, everyone's talking, about Hassan Reddick because of that the trade rumors. And I wouldn't be opposed to training for a pass rusher, but like I actually don't want to go after Reddick. I just feel like there's too much drama surrounding the fact that he's pushing for a trade, and it just feels a little messy. If there's some other pass rushers on teams that are struggling, that you'd be able to get, I'd rather look at maybe someone else. But I wouldn't mind trading for some pass rush help. I mean, listen, Max Crosby would be the dream, but I don't think they're going to part with him. But people are talked about him with the Raiders' disappointing start, maybe being, man, he's a guy I would love to get. But they need to fix the pass rush next year. If they don't do something this year, and even if they do trade for someone, they still should probably draft someone. Dana, thanks for being here. Dana always has some interesting insights. Giacomo, the first pass play was that same broken six concept that doesn't allow for a read on the left, and Kyler didn't even look that way, instead looking for Marvin Harris Jr. on a fade or go against press. The scheme is broken. And I think what we're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, Dana, is the same thing that Kurt Warner talked about on Twitter. Let me know if that's the case, but I think that's what you're talking about here, right? The thing he talked about. Panda Bears, same thing. No one Reddick, been there, done that. Yeah. Ant saying, defensively, do you know what scheme or defensive coverage we usually run? When you're watching games, it's hard to notice. Yeah, that's a good question. I know they like to do a lot of quarters. And I'm sure Dana actually, she knows, she watches film and has some really great insights there. Could probably talk about what they're running, but I know they like to run a lot of quarters in this defense and such. And, they run kind of a 3-4, but a lot of times they're in the nickel. So you've got like kind of, four people up front and such. But Dan said, yeah, the six concept Warner broke down. Yes. So yeah. So getting back to the grades, so we've gone through the cornerbacks and the safeties. Let's look at the linebackers here. Let's see, Chris Barnes. Not a great game grade wise for him. He's never really been consistently good. Though his last couple games were decent on limited snaps. He's playing limited snaps across the board. So, he is what he is, right? He's kind of a rotation player. It wasn't a great game for him. You look at, let's see. So, Mac Wilson, they have him as outside linebacker based on where he lined up, but yeah, he had a nice game, right? 69.5 graded well, especially in run defense and tackling. And he's been one of the free agent signings that I really like for us, right? He has a stretch of games, but overall his grade of 68.8, he's been solid. Really great addition for this team inside. Real quick, got a couple comments here. Let's see. Offense-wise, we have the talent, but I think Drew is holding us down a bit. He's way too run-friendly, and his cost can be ridiculous. Yeah, I'm increasingly moving that direction, right? And yeah, Dana, the sticks concept that Warner broke down. Okay, yeah, Dana's saying we run a cover 3 shell 40% of the time, quarters cover 2 20% of the time. Okay. We mostly run 4-man front unless it's obvious rundown where we switch to 3-4 front. Yeah. Zaven might have to move back to inside linebacker, not a pass rusher. Yeah, I mean, listen, I like him as a Mike linebacker. So, yeah, mostly off coverage zone, very little press. Okay. So Mac Wilson, nice game for him. He's been a bright spot, but I think it was Brett who mentioned this earlier. Kaiser White, 30.8. That is ugly, right? He just 21 snaps and, he's been banged up recovering from injury, but he has not been good, right? Like, remember I said 60.0 is like baseline, like average, like you don't do anything good or bad. Every game this year, except for the San Francisco game, he has been bad grade-wise, like below that 60 for his grade, right? 37.9 overall. That's really bad this year, right? And listen, I liked the signing. He's been a decent player throughout his career. He was a guy that was coming in from Philadelphia, so he's a guy that knew the system. I liked that from a process perspective. But man, I'll pull up his grades from last year. It's a stark difference. So let's kind of look. We'll look at that. Going to 2023. I mean, yeah, he had some nice games, but it was up and down. He had some bad stinkers last year, but also had some good games, right? So there were at least good games in there last year. But this year it has been bad, like every week, right? Every week. How much of that is injury? I don't know, right? But yeah, it's not been good, right? Papo, 8 snaps, graded well, 65.4 on limited snaps, right? Collins didn't have a good game. He was good against run defense and tackling, but Zaven Collins, his coverage 58.9 and his pass rush 40. This was his lowest pass rush grade this season. I think he's been in the 50s, right? So Zaven Collins, right? His pass rush grade has been like like if you look at 57 to 59, it's like it's been consistently slightly subpar, but it was worse, right? This was his worst game since the Rams game actually wasn't a good game for him, but this was his worst. Still love him as a player, but not a good game for him, right? So Zaven didn't have a great game. Okwara had a nice game. Okwara's graded well in some games. He hasn't done a lot in terms of the pressures, but he's had a couple decent games. But he's only got 2 pressures, right? On part-time snaps. So he's grading reasonably well, more in the run defense, right, in the tackling. But the pass rush, hasn't been great for him. So obviously you need some more pass rush is really what you need. Right. Gardeck didn't have a great game, right? So none of the pass rushers there, the edge or the linebackers, none of the pass rushers had a good game, really, especially rushing the passer. Obviously, there were no sacks, right? Lucada, 20 snaps, 44 grade, not good, right? we get down here now to looking at the defensive line, right? So I think that's all. Yeah. So now we get down here. Dante Stills, 59.6. He's, he hasn't had a great year. He's been, very much kind of meh, right? He hasn't been as bad as some of the other players, but, would like to see him step up and develop, take some next steps in development. I got real quick, Jackie, put me out there. I can't the sack. I believe in you, Jackie. I might be better than what we've seen, right? Yeah. So appreciate you being here. And you all are about to do your 100th episode this week. So make sure you check in the Redbird Red Zone podcast. And I think I'm going to be jumping on with them there. So hells to the yeah. Manana saying we need a Luke Kuechly or Ray Lewis type of linebacker. I mean, it would be nice to have an elite linebacker, right? So, yeah. Mizaki Felix saying, I don't think this team will win until they improve the defense. I mean, they gotta get some improvement there, no doubt. But Jackie set up their 100th episode extravaganza now. Awesome. Looking forward to that. So Stills, meh game, right? But we mentioned Tonga, 26 snaps, limited snaps, but he's a nose tackle, right? Nose tackles, kind of, especially they rotate him with Roy Lopez, but he's been pretty good for him. He's graded reasonably well, not great against LA, but the rest of the games have been pretty solid. 83.1, really good in that game. 70.4 grade. If you look back through his career, that's who he's been, right? A nose tackle who plays part-time snaps, because that's what you get with, nose tackles are guys that come off, when you go to the nickel, right? A lot of times. But he's graded well. This, through especially for the last 3 years, like his rookie year, not as well, but I liked this signing when they signed him. I thought it was a solid depth piece, and he's turned out to be, what we would hoped. Collier, had an LJ Collier. For LJ Collier, this is a good game, 55.1. He's a guy, he's played, but you see, he's another guy. He's had one game over 60, right? Not great, but at least he's healthy. Roy Lopez didn't have a great game. He started out well, but he's trailed off last couple of weeks. Right? In fact, he had one good game first week, and he's struggled. We like him as a player, but it's been a little rough. He was good last year. So that's frustrating. Naquan Jones. I will tell you, and I tweeted about this while watching the game. I noticed he made a couple nice plays. He got some pressure on the quarterback, got in his face. There were a couple plays where, the other team got a run, into the secondary, but Naquan came and cleaned up a tackle that other people missed. Certainly you'd like to see the tackle at the line of scrimmage, but there were a couple plays where I saw him run down, stay active, engage in the play, and get the tackle when other people missed the tackle. And again, when you're with the defensive line and struggle as much as ours has, doing at least a player doing something nice, you like to see. And his grade reflected what I saw in the game, right? He 74.9, decent grade. He's been kind of a marginal, he was an undrafted free agent, right, in 2021. He's not been a great player throughout his career. He was with us last year. You look at his grades in the 40s, that's not good in previous years. So he's been kind of a practice squad bubble kind of a player. But, and he's only played 2 games, you see here, right? San Francisco, this one didn't grade particularly well, San Francisco, but he had a nice game, right? So take what you can get, right? Yeah, everyone in this chat, let's suit up and play this Sunday, right? Yeah. Mizaki Felix saying the Cardinals overachieved last year. Now they've come back down to the main. We're seeing the real Cardinals talent level. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think they're going to get a little more on track, but we'll see. Then Nichols, oof, he won the injured reserve, so you don't know how much of this was injury related, but 29.7. That is ugh to the Lee, right? Ugly. And he hasn't, he's had one good game against the Rams, right? Against Washington. He's been really disappointing, right? 39.6. And you feel, again, through his career, it wasn't great last couple of years, but he's had some okay seasons, and just hasn't been good. It hasn't been good at all, right? So, again, when you give up 34 points, you expect to have some bad grades, right? So that's what we've got going on there. Real quick we'll look at Green Bay's grades. You look at on offense, their tackle Zach Tom. That was a guy I loved coming out in the draft, played well. Tight end Ben Sims played well in the 28 snaps. Couple guys fullback. Jordan Love, Josh Jacobs graded reasonably well. Jordan Love graded pretty well, right? 72.1. Let's see, their offensive line up and down, right? Some guy better in the pass blocking than the run blocking, but not going to spend too much time looking at them, right? Max Milton's brother Bo Melton on 27 snaps, 58 grade. On defense, Evan Williams, free safety, really nice game for him. Carl Brooks, I love this guy coming out in the draft as a guy that I think he was a 6th rounder out of, let's see, was he Bowling Green? Yep, out of Bowling Green, 6'4", 296, 6th round pick. He's been up and down for them, right? But last year he was pretty good, and this year grades pretty well. This was a guy I really loved through mock draft Mondays, right? Rashawn Gary, nice game. Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker, right? Some nice games there. Lucas Van Ness, a rookie or second-year player. Is he a rookie or second year? Let's see. Second year. He struggled that game, right? Some really good plays there. Some really good player grades, some not so good player grades. Then let's look at the overall roster. I like to go there. Then I'll get some of the questions and comments in the chat, and then we'll get out of here. Again, on the offensive side, that offensive line doesn't look as good as it did before with Will Hernandez out, right? You still, though, Paris Johnson Jr. looking good. The grade from Furl Holt. Brown's grade 61.5. Tristan Colon, decent. BHM 61.5. You've got, when you got some backups, that starts to get that way, right? But what are you gonna do, right? Murray's grades down a little bit right from this game, 78.6. You want to see that go up, right? Connor's grade's decent. McBride's solid grade. Harrison's decent grade or good grade. Wilson and Dorset grades okay. This is starting to go down a little bit because we've had some bad, we had a bad week, right? So you want to see them start to get that up. The defensive side, again, Murphy, we talked about that, right? Thompson's grade's gone up a little bit from a couple decent games, but this doesn't look great, right? You bring in the nickel, you get Garrett Williams, that looks better, right? Get Gardick in there, but they need an infusion of talent. They need some of those young guys to develop, right? So, what are you going to do, right? So, let's get to some of the questions and comments that y'all have, and then we'll get out of here. So let's see. We've got what is your prediction for the next 4 games? So I'm going to real quick look at the Cardinals' next 4 games. They have the Chargers, the Dolphins, the Bears, and the Jets. The Dolphins have been struggling mightily, right? With Tua out, though. He may be back at that point, so that might not be a good time to reach him. Chargers, they're what are they? Their record? They are 3-2, right? Bears have won some games, right? And with Caleb, they're 4-2, and then the Jets, they 2-4. They're struggling. I think these next 4 games, I do think the Cardinals are going to get some things figured out. I think they're going to go 2-2 in the next 4 games. That's what I think. In terms of the games they're likely to win, that's a tough call. Maybe let's say the Jets and the Dolphins. But it's hard to predict that. But I'm thinking they're going to go 2-2 in the next 4 games. We'll see, right? I'm biased, but we had one of the most brutal early stretches in terms of opponents. Hopefully, we can get some. Listen, I don't think that's biased. I think that's factual. Coming into the season, we knew that, right? I even tweeted about that. Like going into the season, we said the first 6 games are tough, and if they came out of that, like I think the baseline hope or expectation was, coming out of that first games with a 2-4 record would be like, okay, that's about where we think they are. If they're better than that, they're 3-3, then great, right? If they're 1-5, right? So they ended up 2-4. It was ugly this last game, but they ended up 2-4, right? That's kind of what we expected. I mean, I saw a tweet, someone retweet or something, like, I think it was the Goat House, who's a YouTube content creator, who said something about, showed their games, said, hey, I don't think we're talking about this enough, but the Cardinals played, 6 of the best offenses, right? The first 6 games, right? You got that Buffalo, the Rams, Lions, Commanders, and 49ers, Packers, right? Those are some good offenses on there, right? That's a tough stretch. We knew that going in. We talked about that right before the season started. So that's absolutely real, right? 1-3, maybe the Dolphins. That's what Mizaki Felix is predicting. Okay. The offense line grades are officially valued by the time to throw in your opinion. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Manana, awesome stream. Keep up the hard work and good night, y'all. Thank you. Appreciate you hanging out with us. So yeah, that's, it was a discouraging game. It was a frustrating game, and the grades reflected that, right? So here's hoping they get things back on track, and we see some of these young players develop, and that Darius Robinson gets in there and go from there. Remember, check out the Redbird Red Zone podcast. They're having their 100th episode on Thursday, and I'm going to hang out with them, so come check that out. But thank you all for being here. I'm going to get the channel member shout outs up, and we're going to get out of here. And here's hoping we have better things to talk, better results to talk about next week. All right, everyone, be safe. See you later. Peace. Uno, dos, tres,